Hey there, David here. And I just want to let you know that if you've been wanting to help the podcast, now is the moment to do it. The nomination period for the People's Choice Podcast Awards has just opened, and you can now, by following the URL, papaphd.com/nomination, you can go and nominate the podcast Beyond the Thesis in the education category and in the People's Choice category. It's fairly easy. You need to register on the platform to become a voter, and then you will contribute to getting the podcast once more, because last year you made it happen to get Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD on the slate. And if we got on the People's Choice slate, that would be great too. This is a great occasion to show your appreciation for the show, to give me a little boost. And it's always a pleasure and it's always exciting to feel that you are out there. As a podcaster, we put the episodes into the world and it's more or less one way. This is a great moment to kind of reach out and say, hey, David, I'm here, I listen, and I really like what you do. I really like the content, and it has an impact on me and on my life. Maybe find a friend who would like the content shared on Beyond the Thesis. So someone in graduate school, someone who has just graduated and is trying to figure out their life and their career, get him to listen to an episode that you liked and tell them that if they do like it, that they can now, until the 31st of July, cast their vote and get Beyond the Thesis on the slate. Apart from that, I'm wishing you a great summer. So yeah, it's in your hands. papaphd.com/nomination. I'll leave the ball or the puck to you, and I'll see you on the other side. Cheers. Welcome to Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD, the podcast that delves into the diverse and impactful roles scientists can play beyond the lab. With me, David Mendez. Today, I have the pleasure of having with me Lexa Graham. Lexa is a Toronto comedian and writer with a master's degree in chemical engineering, and she's the creator of the DNAtured Journal, a satirical academic journal on academia and science. Lexa runs humor workshops for scientists and other professionals looking to increase their audience engagement, and is a popular host, performer, and panelist for science-based events, including Story Collider, the Association For Science Communicators, Spark After Dark, and the Canadian Association of Science Communicators. Lexa also runs a monthly science comedy show called Dirty Science. We'll talk about all of that. Welcome to Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD, Lexa.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
It's funny because a couple of weeks ago, I was interviewing Leslie Bernson from the Story Collider.
Oh.
So I don't know if you know her or of her, but it was reading your bio. I was like, oh, that's so interesting. And I know that in Toronto, you have Story Collider events, which we don't have here in Montreal. So I'm a little bit jealous.
Yeah, no, I hosted it one time. It was very, very fun. The podcast, I
I'm
think.
sure.
Yeah.
Very cool. So, Lexa, comedy, science, bringing science to audiences through comedy. I've mentioned all of this very quickly in sharing your bio. Can you talk a little bit more about yourself, about what brought you first to science and to your master's in chemical engineering, but maybe also to where does your funny bone come from and how it has kind of integrated itself, or it kind of expressed itself through this marriage between comedy and science?
Yeah, I think as many scientists, maybe grew up, I was always very curious, always asking questions. And then my parents were very much not scientists. So they had to sort of give me a lot of books to read. And so I got very into reading. And then once I entered high school, I really took an interest in chemistry. I thought it was so interesting. And then that led me to going to McMaster in Hamilton for chemistry. And, trials and tribulations. I wasn't always the best student. I loved learning, but I wasn't really good at performing all the time on tests or studying. I was a big procrastinator. But I somehow managed to get into a master's program in chemical engineering. I had applied to a science-based one, but I didn't get in. And then someone in the chemical engineering department was like, "Why don't you do this? This is like kind of similar to what you were doing before." And yeah, so unfortunately, I've just always loved chemistry. It's just such an interesting science to me. And so that kind of like led me into pursuing the learning of it. Although, as I think I mentioned in our previous conversation, I never really loved doing it. Like I never really loved labs, and that makes doing actual chemistry as a career pretty hard. So I've always liked science communication. I've always loved like reading about science. So I figured that was maybe more on my path than kind of. I just really hated cleaning glassware. Quite honestly, it was just like the bane of my existence, and setting up experiments. I had never liked it. I was never good at labs, and I just liked to learn about the theory of chemistry and stuff like that.
Yeah. So on that side, was there any pressure or enticement to go into the PhD by the end of your master's, or was it clear for you and for people around you that you were going to master out?
It was definitely like when I started, again, like not, my parents are not academics, and no one in my family had really gone through like any mastering or PhD program. So I was kind of like very like first gen in that. So I didn't really understand like all of the ins and outs of like the masters and the PhD. So I kind of always just like flub my way along. I don't really plan, which is also not great. Yeah, at a certain moment, like I think about a year into my master's, it was like coming up to like the decision of whether I was going to master out or take a PhD. And I just like looked at like what my life would be in 5 years. The pay is low. It's a lot of, around the clock stress and work, where it's just like there's kind of like constant homework, and it's just like nothing ever feels like it's done, like you can like take a break or anything like that. And I already was feeling a lot of stress, and so I made the decision for myself, is like I don't think that like another 4 or 5 years of this would be good for me personally. I felt really bad because my group was wonderful, my supervisor was amazing, like so supportive of like whatever I wanted to do. But I just felt like I couldn't maybe continue on that path and still be, happy with it in another 4 years, like kind of tripling the amount of time that I would be doing it.
So what I find interesting in what you're saying is that somehow you found mental space, emotional space to introspect and understand that was the reality, that this was not something that you would thrive in, and that would probably maybe render you miserable. But did you have any mentorship in doing that introspection, or did it just come naturally? What was the process? Because there's, I imagine there was some, because you mentioned feeling some sadness, and I imagine part of it is in the fact that you might be disappointing someone who might expect something for you. So can you just talk a little bit about what helped you go through that, and feel assured in yourself that you first were entitled to taking the decision you wanted, and then to take it and feel secure about it, because it's not evident for everyone.
No. And I think like I was, again, bumbling my way along. Like I had never planned to do a PhD necessarily. So I was kind of going into it being like, let's see, like, if this is the right choice for me. I'm kind of like very much of like, is it the right choice for me personally or not? And I think like it was, unfortunately, like I did get mentorship in a sense of like, oh, this is what a PhD would look like, that sort of stuff. But it was truly the dread in my heart that really led me to be like, every time I like picture my life doing a PhD, it was like this dread again, even though like my situation was like, I know a lot of people have like difficult supervisors or coworkers that they maybe don't get along with. I had none of that. Everyone was amazing. And I felt like if everything is like so good in this regard and I still have this dread that I'm going to do this for another 4 years, like, I don't know if it's for me.
That's very good. And it means that you were attuned to what your body and your inner system was telling you. And it's not easy for everyone. And sometimes, again, external pressure may kind of dampen this message that's coming from inside you, but you had the clarity, or also maybe it was the intensity of those feelings was enough that you were like, yeah, no, this cannot
Yeah. And then there
be.
was like, other people have like, I guess, family pressures or stuff like that. And my parents are, they're just like, whatever you want to do, like it's whatever, so that was nice as well.
It's and for sure it helps to have family support, and versus people who might have family pressure, which can be very tough.
Yeah. It's hard to have family pressure when my parents have no idea what a PhD really even entails.
No, for sure. Now, question, and this is something that we didn't talk about during your master's and even maybe your undergrad. Did you already have an interest for humor, for comedy, for satire, and were you already working on some of that at the time?
So I was more of like a consumer of comedy. I binge watched like pretty much every comedy TV show, save for like a couple that I just for whatever reason didn't get into. I loved like, political satire shows. I loved The Onion. And yeah, truly like my dad and I would like watch comedies together like from a very young age. So comedy was sort of definitely always in my life. My dad even pursued a little bit of like he did a paper on like humor and satire as well when he was in university, um, as his own like personal project. So it definitely like runs in the family, of people kind of just trying to be a little bit funny. There's no other comedians in my family as far as I know, but I've always just like gravitated towards if you can make it funny, like people will like you. So
Yeah.
it was another kind of like coping mechanism of when I had to go to a new school, and it's just like you're trying to meet new friends, you're trying to like be popular, and I just found that if you could make a joke out of something, people would laugh, and it would kind of break the tension in a lot of ways.
For sure. Excellent. So now we talked about how you got to the master's, how you understood that would be, the last degree you would go for academically. You also said that there was some emotion in that decision of of sadness, maybe for leaving a group or a tribe that you actually enjoyed being part of. It's just, yeah, washing the dishes, not so much. But can you share a little bit about how you dealt with the day after? So you finish, you get your degree, you say goodbye to people. Did you have any sort of identity crisis, or were you right away able to turn around and figure out what you were going to do?
Oh no, certainly not. Certainly not. And I think it's hard for most people, and especially me. I'm a little less organized. I would guess than the most. I was complimenting you on your organization earlier. So I was also someone who, we talked about, and in general, like the theme of DNAtured is often imposter syndrome. It's just like I had a very, very deep sense of imposter syndrome, because I was like, yeah, I didn't really even feel like I should have gotten into my master's program in a way, because it was kind of like I didn't get into the one that I applied for, and then this was one that I kind of like lucked into in a way that I felt. So even like trying to make my own resume was hard, of like trying to be like, I was like, yeah, I got an NSTRIC scholarship, but I didn't really deserve it. Like, it was really, really not very good. And then on top of that, I didn't really realize, if you have, a chemistry degree, and in the chemistry that I kind of was doing was not, there's not a lot of jobs. So I was doing like materials chemistry. Most people a lot of people in chemical engineering, I think, go into like the oil industry, or some of my like chemistry colleagues had gone into like pharmaceuticals, or makeup and stuff like that. And I felt like I had none of those skills. Like I couldn't even apply to any of those jobs, although I did, and I was rejected very soundly from many of them. And then the only job that ever got back to me was for a technician position. So I had a master's degree and I was like a technician. at a glue factory. So I made glue and
Mm-hmm.
tested glue, which was not my dream, I would say, perhaps not my dream. Um,
It's interesting the way you put it. It's funny.
yeah, in my stand-up comedy, I was like, yeah, it was every girl's dream working with horses, because it was a glue factory.
Oh my god.
But not
By the
really.
way, is that based in any sort of reality? Horses to glue?
So they used to, yes. Back in the day, back when we didn't have like the ability to like plasticize things, yeah, glue was based on horses. However, now we have the ability to synthesize polymers that behave in the way that we need. So it was a lot of polymer based glue. No horses involved. No horses were harmed in the
But it
making of
makes
the
for a
glue.
great joke.
Only the environment. Yeah,
So, how long did that? How long did you stick with that job?
good one. I didn't stick with it very long. I think I lasted like 18 months, quite honestly. I wasn't a big fan of the work, and it was kind of, there was some, difficulty with like some personalities. And I had always enjoyed teaching. So like even when I was doing my master's, like I think like the thing I liked most about my master's was teaching and like being a TA and like taking classes. So I quit my job at the glue factory to kind of pursue comedy, but also kind of, I was just looking for a different job. And then again, the job market was not great. I'm just not really, I'm not a good job seeker, I think. I'm not really good at getting my resume out there and kind of marketing myself. So I lucked into a tutoring position. So I tutor private school kids, trying to get them into like, you know, American universities, prestigious Canadian universities, and private schools.
Yeah, and so is that through another organization, or do you do it on your own?
I do a little bit of both. Like yeah, so through an agency, and through getting my own clients through like my friends or recommendations and stuff like that as well.
So now looking at these last few minutes of between the glue factory and teaching, it feels like you. So once you had your degree, you went on kind of full on. I need to send the most resumes possible and get a job, irrespectively of the fact that you just told me the minute before that you mastered out because you didn't really like to be in the lab.
Yes, but I really needed money.
That's it. Yeah, and you didn't. I guess you didn't also have anyone around you who could mentor you into thinking, okay, I have to detach from the name of my degree. Where can this bring you? But then organically, you kind of actually went there with what I like is to teach, and it's something you knew from before, and you like to learn. That's been clear from our conversation, and you like to teach. So now you're in this position where you're tutoring and you're helping people to do that. So it feels like that first match with the job was a kind of a forced match.
Yes, I was like, let me see if I can pay off my student loans real quick.
That's it. That's it. And now, so you've been doing this for how much time? For
Was it 2024? So I've been tutoring for the past 7 years, 7 or 8 years. Yep.
So it's a career, I would say. It's something, it's what you do. It's your specialty right now, I'd say.
It's my specialty right now. Yes, exactly. So it was never supposed to be. I was supposed to be like getting other jobs, but I really, really enjoyed it. Like I like working with like students who like to learn, and I also like really like figuring out like why someone doesn't understand something. It's like a big, I'm like, ooh, let me figure out what you're not getting, and let me like fix it. Let me break it down into like pieces that you can get. So I find that like very mentally invigorating, mentally challenging. So whereas at like the glue factory, like one week I got so bored that I tried to do a week's worth of work in a day. And it was the best day at work. And then for the rest of the week, I was just hiding because I had no work to do. And yeah, so I was like, this is more mentally stimulating. And it also, in a way, like allowed me to do comedy as well. Because only really working part-time for the most part. So then I was able to go out to open mics most nights of the week. I was able to kind of like meet people, and I was kind of one of the only people doing like a lot of science material. So that made me stand out a little bit at least. And then I eventually started getting paid in comedy as well.
How is it to be the geeky comedian in a group? How is the reaction of people to you getting laughs out of them through science? How does that work? I guess it's fun because you clearly enjoy it, but what's the experience kind of putting science in the world in that format? Because it's not so frequent.
Yeah, I mean it's also very challenging to I have like a lot of like rules in my comedy, I guess. It's just like it's challenging to make sure the science is accurate and that I'm not like misrepresenting the science. Make it funny enough for a general audience, because a lot of the shows that I do are for drunk people and they don't always have the best attention span. So I have a joke about like socialism and the periodic table that I do that I had to stop doing at like late night shows because it would just bomb so hard. And I really had to kind of like figure out, okay, how do I tweak this so that like a more broad audience would understand it. But then if I do like science-based shows, like they love it because they're like, oh, we totally get what you mean on this. So
Okay, because you have an audience that's expecting that.
yeah, so it's kind of like trying to get the science into the minds of like drunk people at a comedy show of like, again, it's kind of like this is why I started my dirty science show, where just like sex sells, baby. Like sex is one of the best ways for people to learn about science. This is like an interesting sex and food, like anything that's like universal. So trying to make all of the science-based comedy more universal and less like kind of like really niche down into something only scientists would understand. Can be very challenging. So it slowed down my writing quite a bit because I had all these like high expectations. But once you do it and you get it, it's very, very rewarding.
Excellent. Now, so often I've talked on the show with other people about, creating content of this or that type. I have had conversations about humor, but one thing that we've never talked about is what forms does it take? So if your language of popularization is humor, how can you start? What type of format can you start with? And what's out there? Because you've also mentioned starting to get paid. Can you kind of give us a map of what all of these stages look like, and maybe the types of way you can do it? Because I guess some is written, but some is, like you said, stand up.
I mean, I kind of do both. I meant to go into TV writing because I've always loved writing. And so unfortunately for me at the time, I didn't realize that like most people who do like TV writing that I knew in the comedy world that I had like kind of followed also started doing stand up. So I was very extremely not a performer when I started. I was, a science nerd. I never like even, did any sort of performance based, like no music performance, no like drama performance. I had never done really any of that. And so it was very nerve wracking to start going to open mics where I'm like, I am so nervous. I would like throw up a little in my mouth before the shows all the time. It's very stressful. So I would say, it is just really a matter of like kind of seeing what like makes you laugh and like makes your friends laugh. So like take a note of whenever you're talking to people and you like make someone laugh and you're like, why did I do that? I mean, it will start a horrible cycle where you're addicted to comedy. So I wouldn't recommend that. And you're just like, how do I make everything funnier? And it's sort of this horrible thing in your brain all the time. But in general, figuring out where other people laugh, figuring out what's like funny about stuff and kind of like breaking it down is something that I found fun. I don't know if everyone finds it fun. And it's just about trying. It's very experimental. Like comedy is very, very experimental, which I think is also why I gravitated towards it. It was like the kinds of experiments I like to do of like, if I say it this way, it gets this much laughter. If I say it this different way, though, it gets like this much more laughter. So a lot of it, unfortunately, is just trial and error of just like trying, putting yourself out there, which is tough. for me and for many people. And just failing and learning from failure, basically, over and over and over again. I've told people that like doing comedy, like stand-up comedy in particular, is kind of like microdosing a breakup every night, where just like the audience could reject you so hard, and you're just like, I feel so bad about myself. I feel so rejected, but I have to just go home and try again tomorrow.
So that's for stand-up. So it's clearly some people are more probably extroverted and have it easier getting themselves like on stage, etc. But I imagine for a bunch of us who come from research, there's more introverts on that side, I imagine. So there's going to be some pain in building that muscle. Now, what about other formats? Because, for example, the DNAtured Journal, what types of humor do you present there? What types of formats? Yeah, how can one express themselves in humor in written formats that are maybe different?
Yeah, so I mean, DNAtured is like kind of like a purely satirical magazine. So satire is kind of like hiding the thing that you're actually talking about with a layer of comedy. And Scott Dickers of The Onion, I think, made these 11 kind of funny filters. So there's reference, where you're referencing something that everyone knows; hyperbole, where it's just like you're just going nuts on like exaggeration. So having satire to me is like having a point that you're talking about, whether it's like coffee is bad or whatever it is, and then kind of slapping on this like veneer of humor and kind of hiding it, but making that information, like that point that you're making, more digestible in a way that like makes people laugh, I guess, which is very difficult because you have to have a subtext, basically. So a subtext of like the thing that you're actually talking about, the point that you're trying to make, and then trying to make a headline that makes people laugh and ideally share it as well.
So is one way to get started to get to know journals like DNAtured, and to pitch. What's the technical aspects of having written something and trying to get it out into the world?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of like generating headlines, I took like several courses at Second City, and they always recommended to start like write 10 things you hate, because the things that you hate you're very very passionate about, and you can kind of like make that very funny. So first, write 10 things you hate, and then try and kind of like make a joke based on that. I also took like desk joke writing. So I don't know if you ever watch like Saturday Night Live, like the Weekend Update, where they do like the news jokes. So that would be like those are called like desk jokes. So I took a course on that too, where you would just like read the news, like you would take a headline and then you would try to make a joke out of that. And one comedian, Laurie Kilmartin, was a writer for, I think, Conan, and she had like this entire list of transitions where it was just like, here are like 50 or 100 transitions you could do. Like you have the headline and then you start with that transition and you see if you can make anything out of it. Again, it's a lot of trial and error. Probably like 10% or less are going to be actually funny. So it's kind of about pushing past like that feeling of failure a lot of the time to be like, okay, could this be a little bit better? Could this be a little bit funnier? And yeah, trying to put those kind of funny filters on it. And so that's exactly why we ask, when people pitch to DNAtured, we ask that they send and submit 10 headlines with like a sample joke, so that we can kind of like read through them, because it's just like, it is so hard to get like 2 or 3 to be funny. So a lot of the times, like if you submit to us 10, like we can see where you're going with at least one of them, and we will tweak the headline to be kind of a little bit more clear and direct and concise. But otherwise, I'm like, a lot of people just have really good ideas. It's just like the wording is so specific and so difficult that we kind of put our magic on it.
You just mentioned subtext, and when you are out there doing SciComm, communicating science, you, depending on your audience, you need to adjust your language. and you need to have one or two ideas that you want them to stay with, and then be able to pass it on in a way that's palatable and memorable. Is it the same in humor? Do you so can is part of your mission, let's say, when you're out there on the stage, is it still to pass on some scientific knowledge?
Yeah, I think like most general audiences, if like the science is like not too kind of difficult to kind of process, are just kind of happy to learn something new. Like we're kind of built to learn as human beings. So a lot of people I find have been turned off of science because of school and high school. So again, my parents didn't do science at all. All of my like closest friends in high school really hated science. Like I would have to help them with science, and they were like, we still hate it. And so I think trying to undo those like academic wounds where people feel dumb, they feel like they're not getting it, they feel like this is something that's not for them, and kind of being like, well, actually, if it's this cool, fun thing that you can learn, that you can at least like heal that wound and get them a little bit more on board with like learning more science. Or like, not all science is bad, right? Like not all science is like so complicated and difficult. Some science is like kind of funny. Like I took a microbiology course at U of T this past year. And what they were saying was that some of the like antibiotic resistance is actually from people going overseas to get like cosmetic surgery. So it's just like pretty wild at how people's insecurities might be the downfall of humanity. That's pretty funny. You know what I mean? Like if you can kind of like frame it in a way that kind of like encompasses like the feeling, it's like it takes all this complicated science and kind of distills it down to like this one idea that maybe like loses some things along the way, like some details, but it's still like you're like, that's kind of funny.
So I really like that you mentioned healing and kind of getting people back to some sort of relationship with scientific knowledge that they may have shunned or excluded after bad experiences in high school. Of course, humor would be one of the best ways to do that. Now, especially since COVID, we as a society have been dealing with difficulty, and we as scientific communicators, which is science, has gotten a bad rap in some spheres. Fake news have sprouted and become this big problem, and so this poses a problem for satire, because you fall into this danger of someone seeing a satiric piece and taking it face value.
Yes, which is one of my biggest fears. Because I don't like it when I read a lot of like satire and humor based stuff, and I really don't like it when you like again the media literacy, because of all this disinformation, is going down. Like you really have to make it so clear that something is a joke. Otherwise, like someone's going to look at it, scroll past it for 15 seconds, but then tell their friend. And then that person might tell their friend, hey, like this whole thing is happening. And it might be based on a complete fabrication. So at DNAtured, like I'm like the primary editor, and I always, some of my feedback is like, this could actually be taken like too close to reality. And so we're really not trying to like confuse anyone. We're really trying to like, even with like poor media literacy, like you should be aware that it's cannot be true, basically. And I have like, people I know and people in my family who, are on opposite scientific spectrums that I am on. And in general, I find that the demonization of those views can kind of just like push people farther into the corner. So when I'm kind of like, dealing with that, I'm trying to find like a connective piece. I'm trying to find, okay, where do we agree first? Like, what are we like, what's our baseline? What do we agree on? And then, instead of kind of being accusatory or, dismissive or anything like that, kind of hearing their concerns. And now this is easier with some people than other people, obviously. And then kind of just being like, oh, like, did you know that this is actually the reason why that happens or something like that. But it requires a lot of information on your part as well. So you have to be kind of up on your stuff in every aspect, which is hard.
Do you ever get questions after a set from people about the science?
I don't get a lot of questions. I try not to, just because like I'm there for like a good time as well. I try not to hit on like super controversial topics. I think the one DNAtured one we did on like vaccines was teens caught getting vaccinated at a party because of like their parents were anti-vaxxers and stuff like that. So that would be about the most. And that was kind of, something that very much resonated with me personally. So kind of getting vaccinated behind my parents' backs.
So someone who's starting to write and who wants to do sciencey humor, and maybe work in some of the news of the day or the week or whatever. Do you have a process that you follow? Because clearly you have kind of an inner compass of this. Oh, this is too much there, or this is not funny enough. But about this frontier of, oh, maybe someone is going to take this face value versus no, this is clearly humor. Do you have a rule of thumb? Do you have a best practice? How do you make sure to not cross that line?
Yeah, you can always like ask people who are, outside of like the science realm, what they think of it. Of like, oh, like, does this like seem real to you? I try and kind of put myself in those shoes. Kind of think of people I know, like, what would they think about this? But a lot of it is kind of my own internal compass of if it's even getting a little bit close. Like, I also skim read, so I think that also helps. Where I'm like, if I skim it and I think it could be real, I'm like, probably not, because a lot of people are just like skimming; they're not reading the full, thing. It should be again so clear, even in like skimming, that you're like, oh, that's just funny. That's just like a funny joke.
That's a good way. So focus group versus, and also do try to read it quickly and see whether the after image is one of humor or one of maybe actual news.
And also just email me. I'm off for the summer. I have some time in the summer, and I will be running like some. I think hopefully this summer I'm going to be running some like DNAtured workshops and some like science humor workshops. I just have to like set that up now that the school year is finally over, and I actually have some free time.
This is great, because I was precisely going to talk about the workshops. I was going to ask you, because we talked about you in front of an audience of people at a bar or at a festival or whatever, with beers and a little bit a little bit of ethanol in their veins. But you do workshops, and I'd really be really curious to learn about, first, what are these audiences looking for in your workshops? And also, of course, what you offer.
Yeah, so I've run them basically for science communicators, specifically at conferences, where we kind of just break down what a joke actually is. And we also kind of go into why adding humor just to your regular science communication, whether it's like you're presenting at a conference, whether you're writing about your science. Obviously, in like an academic paper, that's very difficult, and we might not want to incorporate that in. But academic papers are not for a general audience. But if you're trying to kind of reach a more general audience with science, in general, because of, again, the way humans are built, like we kind of react more to things that are scary or, surprising and stuff like that. Like it kind of like pings your amygdala, of the part of your brain where it's just like, ooh, that's like something novel and exciting. So comedy is not only a surprise, it's also always kind of like something new where it's unexpected. So it's really good in like the attention economy to, you're competing with like all these other things. It's just like adding humor kind of just like sets you above the rest, so that your content and your information can actually kind of pierce through the noise, I guess. And then I find that, the most memorable part of like science talks for me are like that fun little aside that the scientist makes, where you're like, oh, like that little analogy that they made, that now I finally understand like this very complicated topic because you've made this like very funny analogy of like, oh, an octopus shooting lasers. I'm like, oh, that, like, I can picture that in my mind. I can like relate that back
forever. You can now, this for years, this is going to stick with you.
exactly. So I find it's actually a very, very effective means of communication for science that just just adds so much engagement and adds like so much value to your content that it just would make sense to incorporate this in. But again, it's a very difficult skill. Like, it's taken me 10 years to get where I'm at, where I'm finally comfortable being like, yeah, I could definitely like turn a lot of science into a joke. And a lot of the times I just like challenge myself. I'm like, how can I make this funny? Like, I'll take any, headline and I'll be like, how could you make this into like a joke?
And what does the time people are going to spend with you look like?
Previously, I had run like specifically DNAtured workshops where scientists who are looking to kind of contribute to the website. I run like a very small, like 20 people, kind of explain how DNAtured works, what we're looking for, and then people kind of come in with their headlines, and then we go through and we're like, okay, here's why this one might not work, but here's why this one would, and then if we can like tweak it, this would make it funnier. And then in general, I'm trying to like more start a workshop where people kind of come in with their presentation, and I'm helping make them make it more clear and concise, and funny, basically, where it's more of like a one-on-one thing. And based on like, are you in grad school? I'm not going to charge too much. If you're like, some sort of Nobel Prize winner, maybe more. But and just kind of giving them the tools they need to like what to look for to make something funny. Where's the opportunity? Is there an opportunity here in this sentence to make it funny, or probably should that one be left alone and we'll like put the humor somewhere else?
So the one-on-one, I imagine it's a few meetings.
Yeah, depending on the client, like maybe an hour, or work with you through like a presentation you're going to do at a conference or something like that.
And the group ones, if someone is interested, what is that going to look like in their schedule, in their calendar, etc.?
Basically, I just do like a Zoom. So on like a Saturday or a Sunday or whenever people are kind of available, I set out, hey, we're going to have like a workshop, 10, 20 people. Come out, like bring some headlines, or just like come and just like see how it works. And then the other thing is that laughter is great peer review, right? It's just like, it's exactly what peer review should be. So if you're, if you're bringing a headline or even an idea, and you were in their group and a lot of people laugh, you're like, you know what? That's probably going to be a good one, right? That's something that's very relatable. And we can just kind of like tweak that into like a headline for DNAtured.
Very cool. And are there on your calendar any live things happening up to the summer or in the summer?
Yes, I am running my monthly comedy show, Dirty Science. We have a new theme every month. This month's theme is STDs. So we're going to do like the science of STDs. And that's the first Saturday of every month. So the next one we have is on July 6th. At Tall Boys Craft Pub near Ossington and Bloor. And yeah, tickets I think are like $20, $25. But yeah, and we do a lot of fun stuff. We do like quizzes. I do something called Double Blind, where the audience and me, we all close our eyes and we just like see who's done a couple of things. And we also do like improv interviews with like dead scientists. So I get an improviser to come in and we ask all the questions you would ever want to ask Sigmund Freud or, Marie Curie. We see what they would say. Yeah.
That sounds like fun. So now people know, that at least people in the Toronto area, where to go get some booze if they want, and some sciencey humor. That's great.
That's 7 p.m.
7 p.m. So it's perfect. It's after lab.
Yes, exactly. If you're working on the lab on the Saturday, which I know that you are, because you guys are really not for me.
Awesome, Lexa. Before we get to actually the end of the interview, so people who are watching can see your website. That's lexagraham.ca. Can you share your other socials? If people want to reach out to you and ask you questions about something related to maybe their writing, what's the best way to reach out to you?
Yeah, so DNAtured Journal has an email. So DNAturedJournal@gmail.com is a great way to reach us, especially with like your science-based humor questions. I have we have a Dirty Science Comedy on Instagram and DNAtured Journal on Instagram. Yeah, we're kind of just working on getting the socials up because, again, it was the end of the year. It was exams, and I was, very busy prepping all my kids to fail math. So
that's great, Lexa. This has been great. I really enjoyed hearing your story, hearing how you had to kind of make different decisions about your career, of course, academic and then post-academic. You were able to do some horse and glue jokes, which is awesome, and it has never happened on this podcast.
Ooh, number one.
Number one. No, this has been great fun. I think, and now having talked with you about it, I understand how humor and science can collaborate to actually bring some. Maybe not, it doesn't have to be knowledge, but some reconciliation of people with actually science. And I think it is some fun. I think it's important today. We don't need a society where people are divorced from science, because it makes for a lot of the trouble that we're having of people believing what nefarious people or interests are putting out there. So, but you also stressed it, that it's part of your values and of, for example, the mandate of DNAtured to be very careful and very conscious of that issue, and make sure that when something that you put out there as humor it goes into the world, that is the chance that it's perceived as real is low to zero. So that's it's very, very it's very commendable, and I think it's a very good example for any burgeoning comedy writers that might be listening to us. Lexa, this has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, everyone go look at DNAtured, DNAtured.com. It's it's back up somehow. I figured it out somehow. I'm a hacker now. I don't know.
An unhacker.
Yes, an unhacker.
DNAtured.com. I'm gonna go see what's there, and if ever I'm in Toronto on a Saturday, I'm sure I'm gonna go.
Email me.
I'm gonna go take part in one of those celebrations
Dirty
of science and humor.
Yes.
Dirty science. All right. Thank you so much, Lexa.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this new episode of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD, with me, David Mendez, and my guest, Lexa Graham. We are now in the nomination season for the People's Choice Podcast Awards. So if you want to show your support for the podcast and give me the best present ever for the 5th anniversary of the show, you can go to papaphd.com/nomination and cast your vote for Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD in the education and in the People's Choice categories. The votes are open until July 31st. Thank you for your support.